So this has been really a long time coming for Democrats, and we saw them make a lot of improvements in 2018, and that was 2 years after the first women's march, or roughly 2 years after the first women's march. Very much a reaction to President Trump, but also an improvement on their end. Remember, President Obama got a lot of criticism from Democrats for not focusing too much on those state level races, and maybe you saw that Republicans continue to hold on to those seats. Republicans with the Tea Party movement, for example, they have in general been much better historically at grassroots organizing than Democrats have. Like I said, just look at the success of the Tea Party movement. That's all changing, I would say, right now, because you saw movements like the Women's March, and now maybe even the broader Black Lives Matter movement galvanizing Democrats as well.
So when you judge the favorability of institutions as well as individuals, it will depend on the political and the cultural climate at the time. And certainly current events will impact perceptions, opinions, and how people will evaluate the job performance of that institution or individual. And that's what you see here with law enforcement, because even though they present a total number, in some communities, you might have a different perception. It might be higher favorabilities or higher negatives or higher don't knows. It depends on the communities. Then naturally, we did see a difference by race and party affiliation, but race in particular. And that's been historic. That has not changed for decades in terms of the different experiences between African Americans and whites and law enforcement.
And we see that a majority of Americans approve of the job police are doing. We see something similar in our Axios Ipsos poll, where most Americans trust local police and law enforcement. However, there are really huge racial disparities on this issue. So across the board, you have most Americans saying that they trust the police. Now, there are two groups in this poll, and we've seen in our polling as well, where this is not the case. Number one is Black or African Americans. And most Black Americans do not approve of the job that police are doing, do not trust the police. There's different ways of asking this question. Whereas most white Americans approve of the job they're doing. And there's huge differences based on your race or ethnicity. And then the second group is younger Americans. And the reason that I think that's really interesting, we see most Americans under age 35 in this poll do not approve of the police. And I think it's interesting because as these protests continue to happen across the country, obviously drawing attention to racism and racial inequities in this country, many of the protesters are young people, are millennials and Gen Z. And you can see from this polling, from polling that Ipsos has done and other public polling available, that most young Americans who are actively involved in these protests do not approve of the police right now either. When it comes to politicians, the more local and the more close to the individual you get, the more favorable people feel. So generally speaking, I think people are going to have more positive views about your local or your state politician compared to your representative in DC. And then at the other end of the spectrum, the lowest end, is approval of Congress as a whole. As much as you can localize things, people are going to feel better about that from a political standpoint.
in particular with this Black Lives Matter movement, it's in a way very local, because when you go and vote in local races, you're electing your sheriffs, your prosecutors and such. And these people have much more, they're very close to what's happening in these communities compared to your average US congressperson or senator. So I think you're going to see a lot more calls, a lot more focus on electing these more local and state officials in the coming months.